December 1851. Memphis, Tennessee. The rain that fell on the city that morning was cold and relentless, turning the streets near the Mississippi River into a slurry of black mud. But despite the weather, the commercial heart of the city was beating faster than ever. Memphis was the new king of the cotton trade, a city built on old money, new greed, and the buying and selling of human lives. 3 families sat at the top of this food chain: the Harringtons, the Daltons, and the Cavendishes. They were the untouchable gods of Memphis society. They controlled the banks, the warehouses, and the law. They believed they were invincible. But by the time the spring thaw arrived 6 months later, 2 of the patriarchs would be dead, 1 family would be erased from history, and the Harrington Empire would be brought to its knees. And the instrument of their destruction wasn't a war, or a market crash, or a plague. It was a single young man. This is the impossible mystery of the most beautiful male slave ever traded in the South. Before we unlock the journal entries that reveal exactly how this trap was sprung, make sure you are subscribed and have that bell notification turned on. This story was scrubbed from the newspapers for a reason. It is a blueprint of how to destroy the powerful from the inside out. It began with a rumor. In the gentlemen's clubs and smoke-filled back rooms of Front Street, whispers circulated about a trader named Ambrose Fletcher. Fletcher was a ghost in the industry. He didn't use the main auction houses. He operated out of a small, damp boarding house, and he dealt only in specialty acquisitions. On a great Tuesday, Charles Harrington, the arrogant heir to the Harrington fortune, arrived at Fletcher's rooms for a private viewing. He expected to see a strong field hand or perhaps a skilled carpenter. What he saw defied description. His name was Marcus. He stood 6 feet tall, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that seemed to hold a terrifying intelligence. He wasn't wearing chains. He wasn't cowering. He stood with the posture of a prince who had accidentally wandered into a slaughterhouse. Witnesses later struggled to explain the effect Marcus had on them. It wasn't just physical beauty. It was a magnetic pull. Men found themselves stuttering in his presence. They felt an overwhelming desire to possess him, not just as labor, but as a trophy, a piece of living art. Fletcher named his price, $3,000. In 1851, you could buy a house for that amount. It was an insultingly high figure, a number that screamed madness. But Charles Harrington didn't blink. He didn't haggle. He looked into Marcus's strange, gray-green eyes and felt a jolt of obsession. He paid the money. As Charles led his new prize out of the boarding house and into the rainy streets, he felt a surge of triumph. He believed he had just bought the ultimate status symbol, a servant so refined, so beautiful, that all of Memphis would envy him. He didn't notice that Fletcher was smiling as he closed the door. And he didn't notice that Marcus wasn't looking at the ground in submission. He was memorizing the route to the Harrington estate. The Trojan horse had just been invited inside the walls. The Harrington estate stood on Union Avenue like a Greek temple dedicated to greed. It was a place where secrets were currency, and Edmund Harrington, the family patriarch, was the banker. When Charles presented his $3,000 purchase to his father, he expected a storm of rage. Edmund was a man who counted every penny, but when Marcus entered the study, the rage evaporated. Edmund circled the young man, looking for a flaw, a weakness, a reason to send him back. He found none. Instead of a field hand, he found a young man who spoke fluent French, who could quote Shakespeare, and who corrected an error in the family's accounting ledger within 10 minutes of entering the house. Edmund Harrington made a decision that would seal his fate. He didn't send Marcus to the slave quarters. He installed him in the East Wing, directly adjacent to his own private study. He wanted Marcus close to show him off, to use his intellect. For the next 6 weeks, Marcus became the ghost of the Harrington house. He moved with a silence that unnerved the other servants. The head housekeeper, Bess, famously told the cook, "That boy isn't serving." She added, "He's studying," and she was right. While Edmund drank his brandy and discussed illegal land deals and bribed judges, Marcus was there, filling the glasses. While Charles bragged about his gambling debts and his father's ruthless takeovers, Marcus was there, polishing the silver. They spoke freely in front of him because they didn't see a man. They saw furniture. They saw property. They didn't realize that every name, every date, and every crime was being catalogued in Marcus's photographic memory. But secrets are hard to keep in Memphis. The fame of the Harrington Angel spread quickly. 2 weeks later, the vultures arrived. The first was Jacob Dalton, the city's premier slave broker, man with a mind like a steel trap. The second was Victoria Cavendish, a fading socialite from Charleston who would kill to maintain her status. They came to dinner to see the spectacle. Victoria Cavendish watched Marcus with a mix of lust and calculation. She whispered to Edmund that a creature like that was wasted on a bachelor like Charles. She hinted that her own salon would be a better fit for his talents. Jacob Dalton, however, wasn't looking at Marcus's face. He was looking at the situation. After dinner, Dalton cornered Edmund in the smoking room. He didn't offer compliments. He offered a warning. "I checked on your trader, Ambrose Fletcher," Dalton said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's gone, Edmund. Vanished into thin air the day after you signed the check. And the woman who signed the papers, Mrs. Eleanor Stratton, she doesn't exist." Dalton leaned in, the firelight casting shadows on his face. "That boy isn't a slave, Edmund. He's freeborn. He's a kidnapped heir from Virginia. You didn't buy a servant, you bought the felony. If the federal authorities find out, you hang." Edmund Harrington felt the blood drain from his face. He looked toward the door, wondering if Marcus was listening. Dalton smiled, "But don't worry. I can make the problem go away. Sell him to me. I'll hide him. I'll break him. And you'll be safe." The trap had clicked shut. The families were now conspiring. But they were too late, because Marcus wasn't just listening. He was preparing the next phase of the plan. Edmund Harrington didn't sleep that night. The weight of Jacob Dalton's warning pressed on his chest like a stone. He knew that if he kept Marcus, he risked federal prison. But if he sold him, he risked blackmail. He hatched a desperate plan. He would arrange for Marcus to run away the next night. He would give the boy money, put him on a northbound train, and wash his hands of the crime. It was a cowardly plan, but it was safe. But Marcus Thornton didn't need Edmund's permission to leave. At 7 a.m., the housemaid arrived with breakfast. She found the door unlocked. She found the bed linens crisp and undisturbed. And she found the room completely empty. There were no broken windows, no forced locks, no muddy footprints leading away. It was as if Marcus had simply evaporated into the morning mist. Charles Harrington stared at the empty room. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. This wasn't an escape, it was a departure. And on the pillow, Marcus had left a single item, a silver coin. It wasn't payment. It was a message. Judas had returned the silver. The panic that followed was absolute. By noon, the unholy trinity of Memphis, Edmund Harrington, Jacob Dalton, and Richard Cavendish were gathered in the Harrington Library. The pretense of politeness was gone. They were sweating. They were shouting, "He knows too much." Cavendish screamed, slamming his fist on the table. He knows about the warehouse fires. He knows about the bribes. If he talks to the authorities, we all hang. Victoria Cavendish, the coldest of them all, took charge. We don't wait for him to talk, she hissed. We hunt him down, and we bury him. They pooled their money, $5,000, in gold to hire Silas Ketch. Ketch was not a sheriff. He was a bounty hunter who specialized in difficult retrievals. He didn't use handcuffs. He used dogs and irons. He promised them he would have the boy back in chains within 48 hours. Ketch rode out with a pack of bloodhounds. He tracked the scent to an abandoned plantation house 10 miles north of the city. He kicked down the door, expecting to find a frightened runaway hiding in the corner. What he found froze the blood in his veins. The house wasn't a hideout. It was a headquarters. The walls were covered in documents. There were detailed maps of the Harrington estate, marking every entrance and exit. There were copies of Jacob Dalton's private ledgers, highlighting the illegal trades. There were letters stolen from Victoria Cavendish's vanity. Ketch realized with dawning horror that Marcus hadn't been fleeing. He had been reporting. For 6 weeks, the Angel of Memphis had been a spy, feeding information to someone else. Ketch returned to the Harrington estate alone. He handed Edmund a single, heavy envelope found on the table. It was addressed in elegant feminine handwriting. Edmund broke the seal. As he read the first line, his hands began to shake violently. "Gentlemen," the letter began, "by now you realize that my son is beyond your reach. You also realize that I possess the documentation to destroy your lives, your fortunes, and your freedom. You bought a human being like a piece of furniture. You thought you were the masters of this city. You were wrong. I am Eleanor Thornton, and I am giving you 30 days to dismantle your empires, or I will burn them to the ground for you. The enemy wasn't a slave. It was a mother. And she had been watching them the entire time. The deadline was set, 30 days. Eleanor Thornton didn't ask for money. Her demands were calculated to inflict maximum pain. She demanded that Jacob Dalton write a notarized confession of his illegal slave trafficking. She demanded Richard Cavendish sell his fleet and build a school for the children he had orphaned. And she demanded Edmund Harrington free his entire household and resign from the bank board in disgrace. If they refused, the dossier of their crimes would be sent to the federal marshal in Washington, D.C. Panic turned into paranoia. The alliance crumbled immediately. Cavendish wanted to send hitmen to kill Eleanor. Dalton wanted to flee to Mexico. Harrington was paralyzed by indecision. They didn't realize that Eleanor wasn't waiting for the deadline. She was tightening the noose every single day. Take a doable as Jacob Dalton was the first to break. Dalton was a man of numbers, and he ran the calculation. If he confessed, he went to prison. If he didn't, he went to prison. He realized there was no exit. On the morning of February 14th, his wife found him in the study. He hadn't written the confession. Instead, he had hanged himself from the chandelier. The note pinned to his chest read simply, "The eyes. I can still see his eyes." Memphis reeled, but the horror was just beginning. Dekadua Puludua, Richard Cavendish, decided to fight. He hired 3 men from the docks to burn down the plantation house where he believed Eleanor was hiding. He wanted to kill the threat with fire. The men rode out at midnight. They never returned. 2 days later, Richard Cavendish was found dead in a hotel room in Nashville. The official report said heart failure, but the maid who found him told a different story. She said his face was frozen in a mask of sheer terror, and his hands were clawing at his own throat, as if he were trying to tear off an invisible necklace. Te Kuduapulu Sambilan, Edmund Harrington, was the last man standing. He sat alone in his mansion. The silence that he had once prized was now driving him mad. He realized that Dalton and Cavendish hadn't been killed by assassins. They had been killed by their own guilt, weaponized by a woman they had underestimated. He looked at the portrait of himself above the fireplace, the proud aristocrat. Then he looked at the empty chair where Marcus used to sit. "It's over, father," Charles whispered. "We have to meet her. We have to surrender." Edmund nodded slowly. He didn't have the strength to fight the ghost of the boy he had bought. On the final day, Edmund and Charles Harrington arrived at an abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. Eleanor Thornton was waiting. Marcus stood beside her. He was dressed in a fine suit, looking not like a slave nor a servant, but like the lawyer he would one day become. Edmund expected a monster. He expected a vengeful fury. Instead, he found a mother who simply wanted the truth to be written down. Edmund handed over the deed to his reputation. He agreed to all terms. He freed his household. He resigned his positions. He destroyed his own legacy to save his life. "You have won," Edmund whispered, his voice broken. "Are you satisfied?" Marcus stepped forward. He looked at Edmund with those same unsettling, violet eyes that had started it all. "Satisfaction is for those who seek revenge," Marcus said softly. "We sought justice. There is a difference." As they walked away, disappearing into the mist of history, Edmund Harrington realized the true cost of his sin. He was alive, yes, but he was nothing. The angel of Memphis had taken his soul and left him with nothing but his breath. The scandal of 1852 was meant to be forgotten. The Harrington family spent the next 50 years buying Cylons, burning letters, and ensuring that the name Marcus Thornton never appeared in a history book. But you cannot burn the truth. In the archives of the Memphis Public Library, looking at the newspapers from February 1852, you will find something strange. There are gaps. Entire weeks of the Daily Appeal are missing. Obituaries for Jacob Dalton and Richard Cavendish were redacted. It is as if the city itself tried to excise a tumor. As for Marcus and Eleanor, they vanished into the north. There are records of a Marcus Thornton practicing law in Boston in the 1870s. But here is where the story takes its final, unsettling turn. A diary found in 1912, written by a nurse in a Boston hospital, describes a patient named Marcus who was admitted for a minor injury. She noted that the man claimed to be 80 years old. Yet, she wrote in trembling ink, "He has the face of a 20-year-old boy, and his eyes, they are the color of violets. They do not look human." Was Marcus Thornton simply a brilliant spy who outsmarted the cruelest men in the South? Or was the angel of Memphis something else entirely? A force of nature, a curse wrapped in beautiful skin, sent to punish the greedy? We may never know, but we do know one thing. The families who tried to own him are dust, and the boy they tried to break became a legend. So, I have to ask you, do you believe Marcus was just a man with a plan? Or do you believe the captain of the slave ship was right when he said, "You cannot chain the wind"? Tell me your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button. It helps us find more lost history. And if you're brave enough to explore the story of the ship that vanished with 500 people and reappeared 50 years later, subscribe and ring the bell. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the prettiest things often have the sharpest teeth.